Well, good morning. I didn't realize we had so many dancers in the room. The old slang is, some of you really get down. Well, I'm privileged to have the opportunity to renew our discussion from yesterday. And as Jackie indicated, I have three outstanding executives who are going to spend a little bit of time and talk with us in greater detail about how we can enhance our relationships with you and the changing world in the electric utility industry. And if I might introduce our panel, to my immediate left is Paul Koonce. He's the Executive Vice President of Dominion Resources and Chief Executive Officer of their Virginia Power Operating Company. I've known Paul for a long time. Very specifically, he oversees Dominion's regulated electric transmission, distribution, and customer service operations. And they provide service to approximately 2.4 million electric customers in Virginia and northeastern North Carolina. Now, he's also responsible for Dominion's unregulated retail energy marketing operations, and they serve about 2.1 million gas customers in about 15 different states. Paul is a 1982 graduate of the University of Texas, Knoxville, with a bachelor's degree in business. Paul is actively involved in a lot of community activities. He's very, very actively involved in a lot of efforts at EEI. We have a business continuity working group where we look at such items as restoration of service after storms, and Paul has been one of our really critical thinkers in that area. Now, beside Paul is Stephen Warner. He's a Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Baltimore Gas and Electric. He also has substantial operations or oversees the day-to-day operations of the company. He looks at such issues as safety, reliability, efficiency, and customer service, ensuring that all those activities are well coordinated and executed throughout the company. Now, he joined Baltimore Gas and Electric in 1980 and has progressively increased his responsibilities, starting out as an associate engineer in distribution and transmission. And as you know, he subsequently held other positions, and now he has this senior vice president title. Again, someone who's been very, very active in a lot of EEI activities. He's a graduate of, earned his bachelor's degree from Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm from Philadelphia. In 1990, are you an Eagles fan?
No.
Don't tell me you're a Ravens fan.
I'm a Ravens fan.
Oh my gosh. You're going to get some hard questions. And he's got a master's degree in business administration from Loyola University. And then right next to him is a very close friend of mine, Lloyd Yates. He's Executive Vice President of Customer Operations for Duke Energy. Now, I hear that Duke is the largest electric company in the United States. I don't know whether that's true or not. Lloyd leads the transmission, distribution, customer service, gas operations, and grid modernization functions to approximately 7.1 million electric customers and 500,000 gas customers. He has more than 30 years' experience in the energy industry, including the areas of nuclear and fossil generation and energy delivery. He earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. I just thought I'd psych you out. University of Pittsburgh. Why didn't you go to University of Pennsylvania?
I wanted to get out of Philadelphia.
And he's from Philadelphia. That's why I asked him that question. And a master's in business administration from St. Joseph's University. Now, what I like to do, gentlemen, is just kind of set the stage for our important dialogue. And I just want to refresh your memory about what's occurring in the industry. And for the audience, it's going to be a little bit repetitive of some of the things I did yesterday. So maybe I'll just sit down and relax a bit, get you all comfortable, and let's just kind of talk about our business just a little bit more. Now, I recall when I started in our industry as an engineer, it was a pretty simplistic business. And much of my activities, actually I worked with Philadelphia Electric and General Electric and others, was looking at a system that was evolving where we were building central station power plants to meet what we call forecastable load. So in other words, we had dispatchable generation and forecastable load. And I remember those strong components of how we look at reliability, the issues of maintaining frequency and voltage stability, all those things that are essential for keeping the lights on. I also recall that we focused on 3 different customer segments: our industrial customers, our commercial customers, and our residential customers. So it was a pretty simplistic system that we had. But now I look at where we are today, and I look at a lot of major challenges. As I would kind of look at our system today we have 29 states that have renewable portfolio standards, mandatory standards, including the District of Columbia. So we have variable generation, solar facilities, wind facilities, geothermal facilities. I look even more carefully at our system today, and I see that particularly at the distribution system level, we have a number of elements that are making our distribution system much more complex. We have demand response, which also participates in the wholesale market. We have electric vehicles. We have energy storage. We have rooftop solar or distributed generations. We have combined heat and power facilities. We got a very complex system. We got a system that basically says that we've got variable generation and we've got a really dynamic demand. Because one day it's your load, the next day it can be a resource that you depend on. And then we have, when we look at our customers, we have a very different type of system as well. Our customers want choice. We have technologies that give them choice. So for example, when I look at our defense customers, and Paul, you have a lot of defense customers. In fact, all of you have defense customers. Those customers have the appetite where they want to green their bases, where they want to have some independence from the grid. In other words, they want to create their own microgrids. So the customers have certain goals that they're seeking to accomplish, irrespective of your goal of keeping the lights on, keeping the rates low. And then when I look at the residential customers, they too, all residential customers are not the same. So many of those residential customers have the option where they can afford to put on rooftop solar facilities. So they look at, and they want green facilities too. So they look at things very differently. And then I look at the industrial customers as well, and the commercial customers. And they also want options. They want freedom of choice. They want to enhance their operations. They want to reduce their costs. So we got a really complex system. And we got a system that suggests to me that maybe we need to look at how do we put new investment in that system. We got a system that says that we got to operate it very differently. We got a system that says to me that our communication with the customer and how we operate the system is far more complex. So we're in an environment where we're moving closer to the edge. Very complex electric system, substantial new technologies, and the desire from our customers to have choice, to be able to have their green energy. So let me get real basic, if I might, so we can understand just how complex this is. And let's just start with one component of this, and let's start with the smart grid, because I really don't understand all this talk about a smart grid. And I need to understand what some of those key components of a smart grid. I do know this. I do know that there are 35 million smart meters that have been installed. And I do know that there is a viewpoint that by 2015 there'll be 65 million. That's half U.S. households. And by 2020, 130 million smart meters. So what's so great? Help me understand what the components of a smart grid are. So Paul, why don't I start with you?
Well, first off, David, and to all the EEI staff, thank you for hosting this conference where company representatives like mine can hear from customers in sort of a collective voice what are the key issues that we need to be focused on. It's a good way for us to calibrate the speed of our investment, the speed of our technology enhancements. And I think you hit several key themes. One I would add to that, and that's social media. Now, that's not necessarily related to key account customers and large industrial customers who have had a pretty good pathway of making their views and their voice heard. But now through social media, residential customers are making their voices heard very loudly. So whereas companies like mine have been used to operating in a franchise area, in my case, Virginia and Northeast North Carolina, it's not uncommon through social media for my company, the bill that we present to residential customers, to see that compared to a bill that Florida Power and Light presents to their customers. So we have a convergence of a lot of technology, and we have a convergence of a lot of information coming at us, and we're trying to kind of sift through that. But the question of smart grid, what is smart grid to Dominion? It's information. Clearly, we are going to have more information about how our system is operating, and the way that we do that is through smart grid devices, whether they're meters on homes or whether it's telemetry in our substations, to tell us circuit loading, to give us indications of power quality. We know that as we see renewables deployed, whether it's solar or whether it's other types of distributed generation, if we see a power quality event happening on an isolated circuit, can we take advantage of your investment in renewables or our investment in renewables to do something to cause our system to behave differently? So to me, in a word, smart grid is information about how our system is operating in a way that we can take in your needs as well as the production of renewables and distributed gen around our system and optimize our circuit loading so that we have better maintenance practices, or we replace equipment at the point of failure. So that's what it means for me, and I'm sure that Lloyd and Steve have thoughts as well.
Okay, so let me, if I might, just develop what you said a little bit more and just ask Stephen the same kind of question, and ask Stephen I know you've had some challenges in Maryland with respect to putting smart meters and demonstrating the benefits of it. So help me understand, what functionalities does the smart grid provide for customers in this room? Help me understand more specifically what we're talking about.
Sure. First, welcome to Baltimore. I hope you're all enjoying your time here.
Steve, on that note, I got here early this morning. All I've heard about is the after party, but I've yet to meet anybody who attended.
They're not up yet, I guess.
They were all disguised last night. They were in costumes.
One of the first things that people were saying to me today as I was introducing myself to different folks are they didn't realize how nice it was. I hope you can come back and spend more time in the city. I grew up in Annapolis. I consider Baltimore part of my hometown. And you mentioned Duke being the nation's biggest electric company. BGE, or Baltimore Gas and Electric, is part of Exelon, which, when you look at the gas and electric together, the second biggest in the U.S. So we're happy to be part of Chicago, Philly, and Baltimore. So I am a Phillies fan, a Phillies fan, Eagles fan, but Ravens are really my team. In terms of customer benefit, I agree with what Paul said in terms of the overall benefits of smart grid. You asked, I guess, in particular about, what does it mean? Many people, when the term first came out, smart grid, they were talking more about transmission applications. Really, what smart grid has really become more about is the distribution system, because the transmission system is very full of metering and telemetry, and we have a lot of information about how it operates. But when you think about the distribution system, that's usually the portion of the system that's part of the challenge for the customer, right? Do they have enough capacity on their incoming circuits to meet their needs as they're expanding their facility? That's where cost is incurred for those extensions, those increases. Reliability, if there's an issue with the cabling supplying you, or weather, that can be the challenge. What Smart Grid's all about, when you think about it, in our business, energy is created and used at the same time, simultaneously. No storage yet of any large scale. It's gotten more complex, as you mentioned, with the renewables that are popping up all over the place, and many of our own companies, competitive sides, are building more and more of that, as well as many competitive companies. What does Smart Grid bring to the customer? Customers are looking to take advantage of different offers of different suppliers around different pricing mechanisms, different deals. They have better information now about how they have to present to those suppliers about their usage today. And as a smart meter is installed, exactly what power you're using at what interval of time, and you can supply that information to competitive suppliers of the utility and see what kind of deal they can make for you. There are many companies that will come in and make the capital investments for you to increase the efficiency of your plant based on what they see with that data, and then allow you, after that investment is paid for, to begin experiencing that energy savings. So that's an example. I think that's probably the most useful feature of a smart grid for the customer, is what they can do from a price perspective.
Excellent. Okay, Lloyd, you have over 7 million electric customers, 500,000 gas customers. First, just so I can understand a little bit more what your company is doing, how many smart meters do you have installed?
Today,
Is it 1 million, 500,000, or?
it's more than that. Give me a minute. Doing some math here in my mind. Somewhere around 3.5 million.
So 3.5 million smart meters. That's pretty significant. Okay, so we just had some excellent responses from our other two panelists about functionality and the other elements that are important for the smart grid. So let me see if I understand it. So the meter is one component. I'm trying to figure out what these other components are. Now, they talked to me about functionality. So what would be some of the other components of a grid, smart grid? If the meter is one major component with two-way communication with the customer and so forth, describe for me what some of the other components are.
Okay, so first of all, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's always nice to be one of the EEI member companies, because you learn so much from customer interaction and from your peers. And it's great to be here in Baltimore. It is a lovely city. I enjoy being here on the Inner Harbor, and it's a really nice place to be. So back to your question, what are some of the other components of the smart grid? Because when we talk about the smart grid, most people focus on the meters, because I think the meter component is the part that most customers see.
Right.
And it is where we'll get a lot of the data. But we are putting a lot of other devices on the grid. We're putting in things called self-healing systems, meaning that when a power outage goes out, instead of you having to call the customer or have line and service people come out, the system has enough technology and information where the breakers will self-close, and the system will restore itself.
Okay,
we're putting in new things that are
is that called self-healing?
Self-healing systems, distribution management systems, where we have more technology on the grid and we can see the distribution system. I think one of the important things here is, if you start looking at the utilities in the future, we'll be more energy optimizers because of all this technology we're installing. We have much more data on the transmission and distribution systems, and eventually we'll have much more data on the customer's homes once we get the meters installed, and we'll be able to optimize energy. I like to think of smart grid as the beginning of something we're calling grid modernization. If you think about the grid, it was put in mostly in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and in the 70s. So the grid is starting to get old. So now we're starting to reinvest in the grid. And the grid of the future looks nothing like the grid of the past. I mean, you're still seeing poles and wires when you drive down the street in a lot of cases, but a lot of that stuff is being put underground. But there is a lot more technology on there that gives us the ability to see the system, move things around, optimize energy uses, do load management. Is something else we're putting in Florida? We have a very good load management system where instead of building new power plants, we can clip 2,000 megawatts off of our peak on any given afternoon. So there are things that being done on the grid that the customers don't see, but they ultimately benefit the customers.
Okay, so let me see if I can kind of summarize what we set up to now. So it's more than just a meter. It involves the automation of a lot of different systems. And the goal, because it's so complex now, is to maintain some level of control. So that's why we have all these new devices. We have sensors. We are able to see the whole system in real time. That's what y'all said. We're able to know if there's an outage, to pinpoint in greater accuracy where that outage is. We're able to anticipate if there may be elements of the system that are out of balance. We can reroute the power to other areas. Okay, so that seems, so the customer sees, what does the customer see from all of this, Paul? How does the customer benefit? Well, before I ask you the question, but this has got to be real expensive. I mean, yesterday when I talked about the investment that our industry is making over between now and 2030, I used the number of $1.8 trillion. And I talked about the investment in the distribution system, and I think I used the number of $600 billion. That's a lot of money. And when you look at the assets that we currently have and the level of depreciation, we got $800 billion invested in the system. And you're telling me we're going to spend $600 billion just on the distribution system? I don't know whether that's worth it. What you've told me hasn't convinced me that we need to have customers support this level of expenditure and investment. So am I missing something? I mean, all this stuff sounds great, but I'm not that impressed to go and to support you for a rate change for $600 billion.
David, you sound like an intervener in my North Carolina rate case last week. So I'll gladly take that question. I was in North Carolina. We had a rate case. We have about 120,000 customers in Northeast North Carolina, and we had an industrial group that was really taking issue with some of these costs. And, their question to me on the witness stand was, what am I getting for this investment?
Exactly.
My sense is what you're getting a step change in reliability. We typically run equipment to failure as an industry, and when it fails, then we roll a truck and we replace the equipment and we put the customers back in service. With intelligence like what we're talking about here, we'll be able to anticipate transformer failures. We'll be able to anticipate other types of equipment failure. So one, you'll see a step change in reliability, which I think is important when we think about the health and the strength of the economy. Two, I do think that you're ultimately going to see lower costs because we will change maintenance practices so that we'll actually be rolling fewer trucks. When we can anticipate equipment failure, we can replace that equipment on a nice, cool spring or fall morning, and we're doing it on straight time, and we're doing it in coordination with those customers who are impacted, versus doing it with overtime and doing it with a disruption to your businesses. So I think one of the keys that we're going to get out of this is we're going to get a step change in reliability, which is important. With reliability, I'm talking about power quality. And I think as we get this infrastructure integrated into our systems and we learn from the information that we get, I believe you're going to get a step change in our O&M costs.
I see.
So while we're talking about substantial capital investment,
I see.
I think that there's going to be an offset in the O&M expense that is also a part of your rate, because I think we'll be able to do things with much more precision, much more proactively.
So
Okay,
I would
okay,
add
that's-
that those capital investments will also be made more prudently in that you'll have more information to base your engineering decisions, right? So you mentioned the word optimization. As we optimize the network, we're getting more out of each component on that network.
Yeah. So something counter to what Paul said, I don't think customers are going to see lower costs. I think costs are going to go up because
They don't want to see lower costs? How many here doesn't want to see lower costs?
No, I'm saying they're not going to see lower costs.
They're not
So-
going to. I
Sorry.
misunderstood.
I think customers are going to see cost increases, but those increases will be less than they would have been had we gone back with the same grid.
I
Agreed.
see.
So I think what the investment is that you're getting a different grid that's going to be much more efficient, that's going to give you better reliability, and it's going to give you more information about your energy usage over time. I think those, which should result in higher levels of customer satisfaction, but the cost increase would be less than it would have been had we put back the same grid. So I think,
Okay,
so I don't
those
want to set the expectation that costs are going to stay
Okay.
the same.
So you almost convinced me that there's some tremendous benefits. Let me see if I understand one other thing that I believe that y'all said. We've had a lot of storms recently. We recently in the Mid-Atlantic area had a derecho. I never even knew what it was. But I do know that a number of customers were without service for a number of days. So will it help me with storms like derechos and things of that nature? And if so, how?
So I'll start, and let me give you an example. We had part of the derecho in our Midwest region, which is the Ohio and Kentucky areas, where we have deployed smart meters. There were instances where we, instead of sending line crews out, we were able to avoid deploying 600 trucks out by just calling the customer and saying, you need to reset your breaker. You have something relatively simple. And they got their power back a lot faster because we had more information about what was going on in the
So
grid.
you get better communication in real
So better
time with the
communication. I mean, I think over time you're going to see a lot better storm response. You're going to be able to have an app on your iPhone, right? Get text messages back. We'll have better estimated times of restoration. So when power goes out, because we know more about the grid and where the problems are, our estimated times of restoration are going to be a lot more accurate, and they should be a lot faster once we make these investments. So I do think storm response is going to get a lot better. I also think that the system is going to be what we call hardened, more hardened than it has been in the past. So the system's reaction to the storm is going to be a lot better. So there should be a lot fewer power outages.
So you see a better partnership with our national accounts customers. So many of them have responsibilities of managing the energy procurement and other activities for a number of stores throughout the United States, as an example. So you see better communication with them so that they can have their operations improved. Okay, good. Okay, that's okay, so that's a benefit for them. Let me talk about some of the public policy issues, just kind of segueing just a little bit more into some of these challenges. There's a concept called net metering. I don't really understand that concept. I do know that there are 43 states that have net metering. So can one of you explain to me what net metering is?
Sure. Net metering is in the event that the customer has some type of on-site generation that for a moment, an hour, exceeds the amount of energy they're actually using on-site. That energy would actually then, the excess energy would then flow back onto the grid. And their bill for that period would be the net. So if over the course of the day they used more energy than they generated, then they would still owe whoever their supplier was, plus the delivery charge. And in the event that they generated more energy than they used, then there would be a credit for that time period. In Maryland, customers are able to have generation up to twice their load. As a utility, we're very supportive of net metering. We believe that the careful balance has to be there in the regulation to make sure that other customers aren't paying for your investment if you would choose to put in generation. But that customers want to make those investments for, let's say they have exposure on their business side to an economic loss in the event of a power interruption, and they want to put in some type of emergency generation. They want to consider, do they want an emergency generator or do they want an on-site generator? Do they want to do it in combination with greening of their facility, or they want to put in some solar? Solar on a really sunny day may generate more energy than they're using. In those cases, net metering makes a lot of sense for that installation.
Okay, so if I might just probe this issue, you're making me understand this a lot more clearer. So are you saying to me, and I'm going to ask Paul to answer this one, are you saying to me that the customer's on-site generation, whether it be a residential customer or a commercial customer or an industrial customer, whether it be rooftop solar, combined heat and power? Well, let's deal with the rooftop solar, if I might, renewable technologies. So are you telling me that the customer's power supply is equivalent to your power supply?
Well, let me answer it this way, and I think you're getting to the heart of what is going to be the public policy debate at electric utilities over the foreseeable future, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. Steve said that his company embraces net metering. I have to be candid, I'm not sure my company does for this reason.
We got controversy.
Well, we'll
tell us
see.
why.
We'll see. We do have a net metering tariff on our system, and we do have a large number of net metering customers. But when they self-generate, as Steve said, it's netted against their bill. And so for those hours where they're self-generating, they're not taking any utility service from us, but yet we still have the transmission and the distribution investment connected to their home.
I see.
And when in those hours that they're self-generating, they're making no contribution to the system for the transmission and distribution investment into their home. This is where the public policy debate is going to have to really look at the equity issues around renewables and net metering. I'm for it so long as those customers who remain connected to my system are still paying their share of those infrastructure costs, because after all, on a cloudy day or at night, they're coming back to my system.
Correct.
So right now, the way the rates are designed on most systems, it's a per usage rate. So I think the public policy debate that's going to come about is, do you break the linkage between the volume a customer has typically used versus the investment that you make to provide for whatever usage there may be? So, you could argue that there may be some power quality differences, but I don't know that that's the issue. Technology can solve. If the power is good, I think we can solve for the power quality issues. To me, what I'm most concerned about are the equity issues among all rate classes, to make sure that while we're investing in smart grid technology to more accurately dispatch trucks, whether you're generating on your premise or not, I'm still doing all those things, and you're still counting on me to provide that service. So that, to me, is where I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time figuring out what are the right cost allocation methodologies to maintain the equity among the customer classes on our system as we move toward this new paradigm.
So let me understand. We were talking about modernizing the grid and the $600 billion, that the number that I came up with, to put sensors and other things. And so those sensors and all those other, many of those investments are important to work with the distributed generation that's integrated into your system.
Absolutely.
So that's an increased cost. So are you saying to me then that from an equity standpoint, it makes sense that those customers who have that flexibility to generate their own power, that with these increased costs to keep the system monitored and controlled and so forth, that there's a cost that they need to pay for as well?
I think there's a cost that they need to pay for, and I'm not apologetic about it.
Yes.
But I also see that there are opportunities as well. If we make the right grid investments, the right modernization investments, in Northern Virginia, where we have some very densely populated areas and we have circuit loadings that may be approaching levels that we're not comfortable with.
Yes.
If individuals and businesses in that community invest in rooftop solar, invest in other types of distributed generation, there may be opportunities for us to pay you to operate that generation in a way that reduces our circuit loading.
I
So
see.
we have to make the investment. I believe that's unavoidable. And as a result, the customers are going to have to compensate us for that investment, even those that are taking advantage of on-site generation. But for those that have on-site generation, with the investment that we've made, there may be ways that we can integrate your generation into our system dispatch where it may bring more value to you, not less.
So that's called ancillary services and things like that
Yes.
to help voltage control and so forth. Okay, so let me make sure. Now, you and Steve are in agreement, because in a minute ago, it looked like the presidential debate.
Now we're in agreement.
You're in agreement, okay? So, Lloyd, what's your view on all of it? Are they making sense?
I think they are making sense. I specifically agree. I do think that somehow we need to get compensated for our investments. I think in the public policy issue, and you're starting to see this in California a little bit with respect to net metering, is the people who can afford the rooftop solar or some of the other distributed generation resources are typically the affluent or the businesses. So who gets left to pay for the infrastructure investment? It's usually the low income and the poor. So it's this disparate treatment that becomes a real public policy issue. People who can't afford to make investments to get off of the grid, who can't afford net metering, end up paying the cost for all this investment. So I think we have to figure out from a public policy and regulatory perspective is how is the utility compensated to provide that net metering service? Because there is a benefit to having access to the transmission and distribution system, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which we make a lot of infrastructure investment to keep that system reliable.
Well, good. Let me just see if I could just summarize. I heard a number of important things. In fact, some of those we mentioned yesterday. I heard the issue of major new investments that are needed. I heard this issue of equity, which I think is really critical. We discussed the notion of all the elements of grid modernization, and you've convinced me that that level of $600 billion investment, that over time you're going to see substantial benefits, not just for the utility, but also for customers. So let's probe that one just a little bit more. And let's probe it in the context of partnerships. And if you can help me understand, you were starting out, Paul, talking about how the customer can benefit and help the utility benefit from on-site generation. So let's talk more directly with this changing grid, with this huge investment we've got to make, with all these great technologies that we're putting on, with improved communication with the customer. Help me understand whether you see a different business relationship between you and your national accounts customers, your industrial customers, or your residential customers. What kind of partnerships do you see evolving from a changing electric utility grid?
I'll start out. Well, first off, I think if we can deal with some of these public policy issues around rate making, that is essential to allowing us to look after the interests of our shareholders who are making very substantial investment and to partner with the customer who wants to embrace the technology. If you look at the way rates are set pretty much around the country, rates are set to provide peak reliability. So you basically allocate the cost based on who causes the peak on a system. It's typically residential customers, then less or so with commercial, and then less or so with industrial. Allocating costs based on peak requirements, I don't believe is sustainable because it runs exactly counter to load shed, energy efficiency, and distributed generation investments. We're going to have to sort of migrate to almost a usage type of rate methodology. So once we can sort of address those things, then as a utility, we're less defensive about partnering with customers, because if you're, as a customer, doing things in the afternoon, turning down thermostats, and you're running distributed generation and participating in demand-side management programs, I mean, the threat to me is stranded investment and no recovery, and that makes the relationship almost adversarial and, at a minimum, defensive. So if we can keep from becoming sort of an adversarial defensive relationship, but look at investment, look at usage in ways that we can partner with customers, then I think you have a utility that says, okay, let's sit down, let's talk.
I see.
Let's really figure this out. Let's run this system in an optimal way. And so, it sounds simple. Our customers have shareholders. Our customers have investments that they're making. We have a similar situation. So I think the first thing we have to look at is what are the rate-making policies and how is that getting in the way of embracing some of this technology. Now, once we deal with that, I think it really enables us then to look at distribution circuit loading.
Yes.
It allows us to look at power quality issues in a much, much different light and really partner with you to kind of figure out how we can solve your problems and improve grid reliability. I don't mean to overemphasize kind of the rate policy matter, but it has to be addressed. And until it's addressed, there's going to be this constant friction that we're going to have. And you're going to be looking at us like, don't you want us to use energy more wisely? Absolutely. But we have to do it in a way that allows your business to remain profitable and my business to remain profitable.
Okay, so collaboration, I guess that's the right word. We talked about that as well yesterday. Any additional points that Stephen, you or Lloyd want to make? Because I'd like to really open it up to the audience following your response.
I agree with what Paul said. Just add one quick part to it. Oftentimes these conversations come up as adversarial type conversations when a case gets filed because the customer's trying to change something in the tariff or the utility's trying to change something in the tariff. I think the expectation should be that if the utility wants to change something, it's already talking with its customers before it goes in. And if the customer has an issue and wants to change something in the way the tariff operates, if the customer and the utility work together to come up with a proposal, then at least you have two parties going together to the commission with a proposal about how a change could be made, and it's more likely to move forward faster than it would otherwise.
Okay, good. Lloyd?
The only thing I'll add is I think this collaboration between the utility and the customer with respect to grid modernization can go to another level. Because of the amount of information available on almost a minute-by-minute basis, if you think about the future 10 years from now, you'll have different pricing mechanisms, different tariffs, different price points. So I think the account manager's model is different. They sit down with the customer, we talk about how can we help you improve your business, especially if you're an electrically intense industry. How can we help you improve your business? And it goes beyond just cutting off lights and HVAC. It talks about moving people around, moving your product to different shifts, to different areas. I think there are a lot of other opportunities in terms of collaboration, taking that to a new level that helps not only the utility but also the customer maximize the profitability in their business.
Excellent answers. Okay, we're going to open this up to you. You have an opportunity now. You've got three outstanding executives here. Combined, they have 120 years experience in the industry. They've seen it all. I didn't say he's 120 years old.
Right?
Combined. It's arithmetic, 30 years and 20-some years and 30 years. And so it's quite a bit of experience on this stage. So I know you weren't shy yesterday, so don't get shy today. Please.
My name's Alden Hathaway. I'm with Sterling Planet. We're a renewable energy and energy efficiency company based in Georgia. And I want to address this question to the panel, but I'd like to start with Paul from Dominion first, because the studies were done in Central Vermont Public Service Commission, Central Vermont Public Service investigating load factor improvement from 50% to 70%. In the 1990s and 2000s, they discovered a reduction in the cost of electric rates across the board by about 4%. And this was using technologies that now are 10 years, 15 years old, and we've had so many more technologies now, solar and distributed generation, microturbines, fuel cells, lots of demand-side management technologies, and yet utilities today operate in the 40% load factors instead of even the 50 or 55 that Central Vermont Public Service started at. Now, the architect of that, Paul, you might know who he is, was Howard Spinner. He was on the staff of the State Corporation Commission in Virginia for many years. He's still in Virginia, I believe, and certainly willing to testify about it. But my question is, wouldn't it be valuable for the utilities to get rate recovery from their states, to invest in load factor improvement and reduce the rates across the board, just the way Vermont did back in the 90s and 2000? I'd like to hear your comments about that.
Okay, load factor improvement. That he's saying, isn't that a better strategy? Less costs, a more cost-effective strategy than some of the things that we talked about.
Yeah, the question is, should the State Corporation Commission in Virginia give us recovery of costs that we make to improve the load factor on the system, is what I understand the question to be. And absolutely a great question, and we certainly believe so. Our State Corporation Commission really has done a terrific job, I believe, in holding down costs to our customers. We operate in Northern Virginia. It's very affluent. There's a lot of efforts in Northern Virginia to require our company to underground extra high voltage transmission lines to save the viewshed. Our State Corporation Commission has declined to order us to do that because the cost burden to all customers is just prohibitive. So on the one hand, I think they've done a great job in looking after all customers across the entire state and have not been sort of drawn into kind of regional or local issues. But at the same time, it's been difficult to get the State Corporation Commission to adopt some of the newer technologies, and smart grid is one. You hear Lloyd talk about the fact that he has 3.5 million smart meter customers. We have 2 or 3 pilots. We have 150, 130, 150,000 smart meters on our system. And the reason is because our commission is really taking to task the incremental cost of that conversion. For example, we installed AMR meters, or radio frequency meters, some 6-7 years ago. So we've already taken all the meter readers off our system. So when we look at taking a perfectly good meter, an AMR meter, and the cost of converting it to an AMI meter, we have $350 million of net plant already that customers are paying for. We want to write that off, and we want to spend another $600 million deploying new AMI meters. And the cost burden for us to show net benefits to customers is very high. So we're going through and putting together the case that we believe demonstrates that, coming back to your question, load factor. We believe with smart meter deployment, we can adjust voltage on our system so that we can turn down voltage at nighttime,
Right.
which saves production costs, coal costs, gas costs, saves the environment. So that we can, if we can use AMI meters at the periphery of our distribution circuits to know in 15-minute intervals with precision what the voltage is, then we can more accurately dispatch our generation units and save our customers, we believe, hundreds of millions of dollars in fuel costs over the period, and operate what we believe is a much higher load factor system. So yes, I would, and if you know Howard, I would appreciate your help in helping us make this case. If we can get recovery of these costs, we want to, but again, it's capital, and we're going to have recovery.
Good. Additional questions?
Thank you. Joyce Mahalik, Forest City. More importantly, though, I am a swing voter from Ohio. And some of my colleagues at this conference have begged me to finally make a decision so that we could get this election over with. And I just want to let you know that I have now decided. I have decided to write in David K. Owens for President of the United States of America.
Thank you.
May I have a round of applause, please, for his job well done in moderating this session. My statement and question. We're served by over 350 utilities across America, and we often have interval meter. But instead of being able to get the real-time information in real time, we need to beg our utility companies to send it to us 2 months later. If I'm going to support you in the $600 million collection through various riders, will there be transparency in that data? If you're going to put information, new AMI meters on my system, will I be able to log in and see it real time finally? Thank you.
Excellent.
So since I help to manage a utility in Ohio, I'll tell you yes. You know, the answer is yes. What we need to do is figure out how to manage data better. So one of our core competencies as a utility is now that we're putting meters into the Cincinnati and southern Ohio area, we're starting to get a lot of data. What we're learning on the other side is now, what do we do with that data? If we get a meter read every hour from 850,000 customers, you have all of this data. So how do you manage that data, not only for the utility, but to give the customer that data real time? I think eventually you should be able to get on your iPhone and your iPad, and you should be able to see data real time in terms of how you're managing your energy usage. In fact, yesterday I came in from a conference where people were running pilots to show those things. So I do think the future does look like you being able to manage your energy real time in your homes or in your businesses. I think there will be internet-connected appliances and all of these things, and I think the capability, and we're setting this up through grid modernization, is you'll be able to see that data almost real time to help you optimize your energy usage.
So that's the aspirational goal.
Yes.
And so do you see out of that partnerships with firms such as Google and firms that know how to manipulate a lot of data?
So I do think ultimately there will be partnerships with those firms, and I think Paul brought this up earlier. So all this stuff is fine and well, but we're in the business to earn money and get a return on these things. So if you think about it, we're being encouraged. This is probably the only business, maybe there are others in the country, where you're being encouraged to try and figure out how to sell less of your product. Anybody out here in the industry, out here in the audience, want to sell less of what you produce on a day-by-day basis? So while all of this is going on, we have to change our business model to facilitate this. And while we're changing our business model, by the way, we have to educate our regulators so that they help us change our business model so that we can earn a return doing all of those changes. So that complicates things significantly for us. Okay. So we're not adverse to these things, but we have a lot of people to educate and change. And by the way, we have quarter-by-quarter expectations from our investors who aren't really tolerant of, just take your time. We know you'll earn a return eventually.
Sure.
Get back to us when you come up with some ideas. It doesn't work that way.
Other questions?
Good morning, Bob Blair from State Street. I have two questions. One, a frustration, and the second is a question. So I hear the word partnership being used a lot.
Yes.
And being a national account customer, how could we partner closely with the utilities to help improve the system? And then a frustration is have hundreds of properties in your service territory. We talk about the smart grid and building the infrastructure. I get bills on the 15th, 18th, the 20th, the 30th. Why can't I get one bill for all the sites on one day?
Okay, who wants to take that one? One bill, consolidated bill.
So I'll start. At BGE, we installed a new customer care and billing system this year that it will enable us to start to step into providing the types of functionality that were mentioned in terms of providing that customer experience that you come to expect from many of your other types of suppliers. Prior to implementation of this system earlier this year, we were using a customer information system from the 80s, which did the job, but did the job of the 1980s. It didn't do the job of 2012. So we're building some of those investments that the utilities make are designed to respond to the customer expectations, which I believe are fair expectations. Shifting a little bit in terms of an example of changing the business model. In Maryland, utilities like BG, we've been decoupled from your usage. If you're a commercial industrial customer in Maryland, I have no incentive to sell you more power. I have nothing interfering with my ability to work with you to help you save energy. The cost of the transmission and distribution system and recovering the maintenance and capital investments on that is, while it's still billed volumetrically, it's adjusted to ensure that even if you use less energy, that I'll still get the fair return on the delivery piece.
Right. Okay, so we had asked by the customer. Paul, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would add, and I share your frustration with the billing systems of some of these utilities, and I really think this is an area where you're going to see social media have a much larger impact on how utilities behave, because if you think about utilities and the investments that we've tended to make, it's been in poles and wires and transformers and trucks, and if you look at my company, first dollar goes to the operating side of our business. It's almost like the United States and the military. I mean, that's the front line of our business, and that's where first dollar goes. And so, like Steve said, we put in place these IT systems, and we tend to live off of antiquated IT systems on the customer side probably longer than even the IT people would tell you is wise to do. But in some respects, we've been able to almost get away with it, because we've operated in franchise territories, monopoly operations, and it's not as if our customers, had really any other place to go. I think where we're going to see substantial change on what I would call the customer service side of our business, I think it's going to be brought about by social media, with folks comparing BG&E to Dominion. The only thing that separates us is the Potomac River. Why does a bill look better on BG&E system than mine? I think so. I think it's going to be interesting. In fact, I was back on my campus, the University of Tennessee, talking to business students, and they were really fascinated about a monopoly. And I think that you're going to see utilities having to behave less like monopoly, because my quality of service is going to be compared to Southern California Edison in the social media world. So I share the frustration, and I think the utilities have been able to get away with that side of our business probably longer than even our internal folks would say is wise. The first part of your question, how do we partner? We talked about partnership. I think Steve hit it. If you really want something, if you need something, we need to know about it. And if you don't have a key account way to get your message through, I would call, in my case, me, because we want to know about it, because we are much more effective going, as Steve said, together to the commission to talk about terms and condition changes when we're sitting there with a customer talking about, this is what we want to do and this is why we need to do it. We've got a lot of interest in renewables on our system. We have 400 megawatts of wind, and we're applying to install solar. We're going to come up with a renewable rate. We have one customer I know of in particular that wants renewable power. We're going to basically carve out that wind and that solar. We're going to price it separately, and then you as a customer can dial in. Do you want 25% renewables, or do you want 100% renewables? In other words, you can take I want 25 of my bill to be priced off of your renewable rate, the 75% being priced off a system rate. And we've created that rate methodology because a customer said, this is what I have to have. I have a worldwide supply chain renewable obligation, and if I don't meet it, then I'm not going to be able to supply my downstream partners. So I would tell you, communicate, and if you don't have a key account rep, the managements of our companies and all utilities want to know what it is we need to do.
Okay, we're out of time. We covered a lot of issues. What we sought to try to do was to integrate the themes of this panel with many of the issues that we heard yesterday. The substantial, first to understand more directly what we mean by the smart grid, to understand more clearly the benefits that we see derived from this $600 billion investment, to understand particularly some of your concerns and how we can have a better partnership in going forward so that we can have these changes adopted with those investments in a way that reduces your costs, improves your overall operations, and makes you a more valuable element to us and us a more valuable element to you. Please join me in thanking this outstanding panel.